Hi, everyone. I'm Thérèse, and this is New York Girl Again, The After, the podcast for caregivers who have survived the hardest chapter of their lives and are now gathering both the courage and the strength to write the next one. I'm recording this episode on Easter, a day symbolic of rising, of renewal, of new life, of hope, and of beginning again. And I keep coming back to how complicated and honestly how difficult those words can be, beginning again, especially after loss and caregiving. Because just because something ends doesn't mean you automatically know if or how to start over. When our caregiving journeys end, people assume what you're grieving is the person you lost. And of course that's true. Very, very true. But it's incomplete. Because what also ends is your role as a caregiver. And that role was not small. In fact, it was more than a role. It became a part of you. It structured your entire day, what time you woke up, what you paid attention to, what decisions mattered, what didn't. Research in caregiver psychology, especially from organizations like the National Alliance for Caregiving, shows that long-term caregivers often spend 20 to 40 or more hours per week in that role. And for many of us, it's far more than that. For me, during the last leg of my journey, it was 24/7 for years. That's not just a part of your life. That is your life. So when it ends, you don't just feel loss. You feel disorientation. You feel lost. Because the structure that organized your thinking, your days, your purpose is suddenly gone. And I want to stay here for a minute because this part really matters. If you feel disoriented in this phase, there's a reason for that. When you are caregiving long-term, your brain and your body adapt to that level of demand. You're constantly anticipating needs, making decisions, often life and death, watching for changes, adjusting in real time, all the time. All while loving this person and trying to make them the happiest, healthiest, and most pain-free version of themselves that you can. It's a tremendous amount of stress. There's actually a term for this in stress research, and I've spoken about it before. It's called allostatic load, which refers to the cumulative effect of ongoing stress on the body and brain. Over time, your system becomes used to being on, not occasionally, but continuously, constantly. So when caregiving ends, your environment changes, but your nervous system doesn't immediately follow. And that's why silence can feel uncomfortable. Stillness can feel unfamiliar. And having time doesn't automatically feel like relief. It can feel like something is missing. Not because you don't long for peace, but because your system was trained for responsibility. So what happens next? Most people stay frozen in this space of, I don't know what to do. And that's valid. And I think it's especially true of caregivers. But I don't think that's the most important question. I think the more important questions are, am I allowing myself to want something different now? Am I allowing myself to be open to the possibility that perhaps anything could be possible now? Because I think this is where a lot of us caregivers get stuck. There's a concept in grief psychology called continuing bonds. The idea that we don't detach from the people we've lost. We maintain a relationship with them in a different way. But for caregivers, that connection can sometimes become limiting, where moving forward starts to feel like disloyalty or forgetting them or somehow diminishing what that person meant. So instead of building something new, you stay in place, not because you can't move forward, but because you feel stuck, unsure of what you want, or maybe even guilty for doing so. So if we stay with that question, am I allowing myself to want something different now? The next part becomes, what do you actually do with everything you built during caregiving? Because caregiving provides gifts that sometimes don't reveal themselves to us until after the journey has ended. It builds something in you. It builds discipline, awareness, emotional range, the ability to show up even when you are completely exhausted. It builds patience and empathy. And maybe most importantly, it builds the ability to care deeply and consistently for another human being on every level. And that doesn't just disappear when caregiving ends. That stays with you. But if it doesn't get redirected, it can start to turn inward. And that's when you find yourself stuck in your own head, replaying things, overthinking, feeling like all that energy, all of that care has nowhere to go. There's research in behavioral psychology that touches on this. When a major role or sense of purpose ends and it isn't replaced, people often experience a drop in motivation and direction. Not because you're broken, but because the structure that once held their energy is no longer there. So the question becomes, very simply, where does that part of me go now? For me, that question didn't get answered all at once. It took time, a very long time. And if I'm being honest, it took a lot of missteps along the way. But eventually, I started to realize that everything I had been doing for someone else, I needed to begin redirecting. First, back toward myself, toward getting healthier, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Because after years of caregiving, I was depleted in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. And then, slowly, I began to turn outward again. Not in the same way caregiving required of me, but using those same parts of myself that had been built during it. The empathy, the attentiveness, the ability to truly understand what someone is going through. And I'll be honest, there was a lot of trial and error in that process. I gave my energy to some people and some places that were more than willing to accept it, but didn't respect it. And that was a hard lesson. But over time, I found my way back to work that actually matters, work that feels aligned. And that's where New York Girl Again came from. It gave me a place to take what I had lived through and make it useful. To say, this mattered, and it still matters, just in a different way. A way that allows me to support other caregivers and remind them that they are not alone in this part either. And as I've been doing this work through New York Girl Again, I've also been working on something new, and I'm really excited about it. It's called the Living Passport Project. And it was directly inspired by caregiving and by the people we care for. At its core, it's about creating real connection between older adults and younger generations. giving people the space to share their life experiences and to be truly seen and heard. But what really excites me about this is that it's also about the caregivers of the future. Because the things caregiving teaches us, empathy, patience, presence, those aren't things everyone naturally develops. And this is a way to help build that in the next generation. It's something I'm actively working on now, and I'll be sharing more very soon. But for me, it feels like such a natural extension of this journey, taking what caregiving gives us and allowing it to continue to matter in a really meaningful way. So, what does this actually look like for you? Because this isn't just my experience. This is something you can do too. It starts with one decision. It can be a simple goal to take a small amount of that energy you gave to someone else and put it back into your own life. Maybe that's your health. Maybe it's getting stronger again, physically. Maybe it's creating some structure back into your day. Maybe it's reaching out, connecting, or trying something you haven't done in a long time. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be intentional. Because that's what caregiving taught you. How to be intentional with your time, your energy, and your attention. And that same skill can now be used for you. And then, over time, you start to expand that outward again in a way that feels right, in a way that's respected, in a way that has purpose, in a way that brings you joy. So, if you take anything from this episode, I hope it's this. You are allowed to want a beautiful life, not just one where you get through the day, a life that feels good to be in, a life that has direction, a life that has meaning for you. And wanting that does not take away from what you gave or who you loved. It means you're finally including yourself again. And that's where this next part begins. I'm Thérèse, and this is New York Girl Again, The After. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Now go out there and get that beautiful life.